Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the fall meeting of the October meeting of the Stony Brook University Council. I'll remind everybody that we're being webcasted as required under the state laws. And I am going to ask the board members to introduce themselves. We'll go around the table.
Alexander Carlutzis.
Christopher Hahn.
Matthew Cuomo.
Frank Trotta.
And who else do we have at the table joining us?
Oh, Richard Larson, President of the University Senate.
Hi, Richard.
Ahmed Balazi, President of Stony Brook Alumni Association.
How are you today?
Good, thank you.
Good. So I'll recognize a quorum of the trustees, and we'll start with Judy, and we'll just introduce some of Maury's leadership team here with us today.
Sure, I'm Judy Griman, I'm Chief Deputy to the President.
Coral Ledgway, Provost.
Al Paz, Executive Vice President for the Health Sciences.
Jed Shivers, Senior Vice President, Finance and Administration.
Good morning, Rick Etto, Vice President for Student Affairs.
Good morning, Judy Brown Clark, Vice President of Equity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer.
Hi, my name is Braden Hosh. I'm the Vice President for Educational and Institutional Effectiveness.
That's enough fun.
Good morning, Larry Zachary, Vice President for Enterprise Risk Management, Chief Security Officer.
Good morning, Suzanne Shane, Interim Chief Campus Counsel.
Good morning, Heather Montag, Senior Associate Vice President for Budget, Financial Planning and Analysis.
Rachel Kavanaugh, Executive Assistant to the Chief Deputy and the President.
Great. Rachel, and thanks for always keeping us all organized and getting us all the materials we need for our meetings. You do a great job, so thank you for that. Maury, we'll get right to the agenda. That's all right?
There we go.
Good.
Shortest chair's report.
No, well, I haven't started yet. So let me just get. Let's start the meeting with our Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll do the approval of the minutes.
Okay.
Not that quick. All right, Mayor Frank, lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
All right, so good to see everybody. First order of business is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting on May 2nd, as well as our special meeting that we held over the summer to address the student code of conduct on July 18th, and both of 2022. Chris Hahn moves them, Matt seconds them, Frank Trotta seconds them. Any comments, revisions? Any abstentions?
At least as with respect to the July meeting, I was not present.
You weren't there, so duly noted. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Let the record reflect Matt's abstention from that special meeting. So, Chair's report, don't have much of a report, but I did tell Maury, we chatted last week. Really excited, Governor Hochul has created this special fund for Long Island called the Long Island Investment Fund. And it's being run by Empire State Development. And it's geared towards, the biggest pot of the money is geared towards some really neat projects, especially related to our life sciences and our innovation economy. We just did with the governor a really neat announcement at the Feinstein Institute at Northwell, and we're hoping that Stony Brook also participates in that program because certainly that's what it's geared towards. So we're excited about it, and hopefully Maury and her team are working diligently on submitting some good applications to ESD on that. Very good. And with that, Maury, I will hand it over to you for your President's report.
Sure, happy to do so, and good morning, everyone. Glad to have you. So, beginning of a new academic year. In my time here, this is by far the best year. Campus is alive and buzzing with activity, and it's really exciting to see our students really embracing a full on-campus experience. Our head count this year is just under 26,000. We are a little smaller than we've been in the past. There are two primary reasons for that. The first is that during the pandemic, community colleges had a 20 to 40% drop in enrollment. And that therefore changed the transfer pipeline for us. And, you know, nationally, we're watching this trend. Everybody is down, really across the nation. We certainly will be doing a lot of work to try to even work harder in recruiting people that we didn't used to have to recruit so hard, but we will see what happens with that. And we're doing a lot of work on the enrollment side to figure out if this is a permanent thing and if we therefore need to rebalance our expectations of size of first year class versus number of transfer students and so forth. We knew this was coming, and we certainly forecasted it and planned for that, but we've got to figure out what it means for us in the long run. And my thanks to both Carl and Jed, who are doing our work to do our enrollment planning long term for the future, figure out where we're going to end up. I'm sure many of you have seen the latest U.S. News and World Report rankings. You know, they are, you know, sometimes rather arbitrary and capricious. Like, they change their algorithms all the time, and you sometimes go wildly up or sometimes wildly down based on the decisions that they make. But it is something that people watch, and it is something that families pay attention to, even though they don't understand the algorithm changes and what it might mean. And they are a ranking system that tend to really privilege the wealth of an institution, right? Like, so some of their measures are things like amount of money spent per student and amount of money available per faculty member and things like that, which are not necessarily correlated to the quality of an institution. But we have our highest ranking ever this year, number 77 among national. That's a big jump, 16 places from a year ago. We moved up 7 spots to number 31 among the public universities. But this is, of course, the thing that we're most touting. It's the first time that Stony Brook is alone as being ranked as the number 1 public university in New York State, without being tied with another. So we're pleased to see that. And, you know, who knows what will happen next year. So I think it's useful just reflecting on what this institution has accomplished over the last couple of years. Because despite the fact that it has felt like all we've talked about is the pandemic, there's actually been a whole lot else going on other than that. I mean, obviously, I think we did a great job as an institution during the pandemic, and that is both about how we have kept our academic programs running, our students making progress towards their degrees, delivering our educational mission. But of course, we also had a large health system to run during that, and our health system played such an important role on Long Island in caring for Long Islanders, both in treating Long Islanders with COVID, vaccinating over 600,000 people, but also the ways in which they shifted very quickly to telehealth to continue providing other services beyond COVID care. In addition to that, we've had, we'll just call them choppy seas as it relates to the budget, and we've done an enormous amount of work on this campus to respond to those ups and downs, creating first a very broadly engaged campus planning process that was referred to as the Campus Budget Initiative, and out of that came a lot of ways that we could do a better job of shepherding our resources, identifying ways that we could increase our revenue, as well as understanding things we needed to be doing ourselves to kind of get out of our own way. And we've implemented a lot of those changes, and those things have really made a difference on our campus. We've been busy hiring a new leadership team, some of whom you see in the room with you today. And we have been working hard as a team together, understanding the ways in which we support one another in our missions and goals, and really figuring out how we work together collaboratively as a team. And that's very exciting. We've been working hard with the system to help sort of, shall we say, make the processes between system and campuses work more smoothly. We've made a lot of progress on that. I would say there is still work to be done, and we will continue advocating for, let's just say, quicker resolution to questions and more understanding of how different policies can play out on different campuses. It's a large, complex system, and one size does not necessarily always fit all. We are in the middle of a strategic planning process now called Project Reach. It has broadly involved the campus community and will continue to do so. We spent last semester really understanding both our history and how we sort of compare to our national peers, really thinking hard about our own mission and our values. And we've now finished that work, and that will now turn into the actual planning part of the process. It will be led by Carl Lejouet, our provost, next fall, and we're all really excited for moving into that planning phase and really thinking about how our mission, vision, and values really feed into what will then be a plan that we can implement in the years going forward. We've taken some really big bets, the largest of which is the work we've done and our proposal to be the anchor institution for Governor's Island. This is the city's sort of request for proposal to find an anchor higher ed institution to turn Governor's Island into a climate science solutions center, really a living laboratory where research will quickly be put into a demonstration, where there will be relationships with companies so that as research is being implemented, companies can sort of figure out and help us understand more quickly how you would get solutions into the market, where students K through 12 through higher ed would come to be part of and learn from. What does it mean to have sustainable infrastructure? What is green energy like? What do climate and coastal adaptations do in terms of making land responsible to climate change? And certainly the last couple of weeks in our attention on hurricanes and megastorms is a good reminder of the urgency to do this work. We were one of 4 finalists, only 3 of whom ended up submitting a proposal. We turned in our RFP a couple of months ago. We had our interview with the city a couple of weeks ago. There are several more steps to the process. We don't know exactly when the city is likely to make a decision, but we're hoping it's before the end of the year.
That'll be great.
That'll be great.
Yeah,
Very
great.
excited to announce that the Simons Foundation made a large gift to this institution to create the Stony Brook Simon STEM Scholars Program. This is a program that is modeled on a program that's been running at UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, for over 20 years, called the Meyerhoff Scholars Program. It is a program that is focused on recruiting and supporting underrepresented students who are interested in careers in STEM, with the idea of giving them the research experiences, the internship experiences, and the support to prepare a group of undergraduate students, hopefully, for pursuing PhDs or MD PhDs in the field. And we are super excited about this. We have hired a great new director for this program. He starts work maybe today, I think. Is it today? Yeah. And we will be recruiting our first class. Ultimately, our goal is to get to 50 students a year, meaning 200 students at any one time who are part of this program. So really generous gift from the Simons Foundation, and really excited for how this aligns with our mission and values, and we're excited about that. A lot of the work coming out of Strategic Budget Initiative told us to focus and invest on ways that we're supporting our faculty in their research endeavors. And I'm pleased to report that we're up over 20%, having made those investments in staff in support of our faculty who are research active. We've done a lot of work over the last couple of years to move forward as one university, integrating East and West, deans working together, staff working together in places where it is appropriate, and that's going great. Under Judy Brown Clark's leadership, we've been doing an enormous amount of work in equity, inclusion, and diversity, and very excited about that. Other areas of staff focus have been around HR redesign, and we have been also really focused under Larry Zachary's leadership on our enterprise risk management effort. We did not previously have a campus infrastructure to support that planning across units and across the entire university. And Larry's been doing a great job in leading us in that ways, and there are so many reasons why it is absolutely vital for a modern institution. And under Justin Fincher's leadership, he's not here today, but our vice president for advancement, we've been doing a lot of work to increase our engagement with our alumni, with our local community under our sort of GR and community relations efforts, and feel really good about the ways that we're increasing our engagement with our local community. So let me tell you a few things we're really focused on this year. My leadership teams had multiple retreats as we think about not only our goals for the year and our priorities, but also how we're going to work together as a team. And actually on the wall, you can see some of the outputs of that work that's meant to remind us of the work we do together, advancing excellence, cultivating talent, achieving our aspirations, and together. And really three of the things we're focused on, you can boil it down to 3 R's. Faculty love threes, they love alliteration, so here we go. Revenue, reputation, and rewards. We have to continue to be focused on revenue. As you all know, we are very constrained in the levers that we have for increasing revenue for this institution. The 2 largest of a public institution are your state support and your tuition. And as you know, state support has been relatively flat, or has been completely flat until just this year, for over a decade. This year there was an additional investment in faculty, which we were excited to see. And the other is tuition, which we do not control. And over 40 years has only gone up 16 times. You won't find many other states where that is the case, and has been flat for the last 3 years. There are things, though, that we can do as a campus community. They'll never be enough to meet in a given year the inflationary costs that we bear as an institution, but they have to be part of the solution. So we're very focused on that. Reputation matters enormously in absolutely everything we do. Not only do they play a role in many of the rankings, the many different national rankings, many of them lean on reputational things. But for us, reputation matters for being able to recruit great students, for being able to recruit great faculty and staff. And so we, as a leadership team, need to be very focused on the ways that we continue to increase our reputation. And rewards. We need to do a lot to be able to not only recruit great faculty and staff and students, but to keep them here. And so a piece of that is recognizing people's efforts and really rewarding people in the ways we can for the work that they do for this institution. So that is an update on some of our stuff, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Wow, very impressive. You should take next Sunday off.
Am I allowed to have a day off? Are you giving me permission?
Sunday.
Only Sunday, okay.
But no, really, great stuff, Maury. I'm sure we all have some questions. I'll start off because you gave us so much information. On the student enrollment, is some of the slight decline, is it still related to prior national administrations, sort of policies that sort of discourage international students from coming here? And do we see a decline in our international student population? And if that was back to where it used to be, would we be, back to normal?
And yes and no. So there is no doubt that we continue to see a decline in the number of international students. And that is a complex mix of factors that include COVID, that include immigration policies, that include, a sort of choice of many students to look elsewhere than to the U.S. For their educational opportunities. Would we be back to where we were? No. Because for us, our recruitment of international students was primarily for first-time college students. And we're at our previous levels for that. Where we saw the drop in enrollment was in transfer students. And for us, it's a complex mix to decide whether or not you want to grow your first in college students, because there are housing implications related to that, as well as a variety of other things if you're shifting your mix. And you really need the long-term plan for whether you're going to make that shift. And if we're going to make that shift, we have a lot of work to do on the housing side to know whether we can accommodate more first-year students. Because for the most part, first-year students tend to live on campus, and therefore we need more beds, right? And that, on this campus, is a very long-range proposition to ever growing the number of beds that we have available to us. So
Makes sense.
they're
But historically, we've gotten most of our students from the Long Island and New York City metropolitan area, right? It's fair to say over half, you know?
Oh, well over half. Yeah.
And so, we still have a demographic challenge here on the island. I mean, we just have less kids in the 13 to 18-year-old range.
Absolutely.
And it's not projected, that number is not projected to increase. So all the universities and colleges on the island are going to be facing those types of challenges because the pool is smaller. So we definitely need to be thinking about other ways we're going to maintain our student population from outside Long Island as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't think we're very worried about that, given the robust application pool that we have. But
And maybe more of a challenge for some of the other colleges on the island.
Correct.
Got it.
Nationally, there are only 2 states with a growing high school population. Those are Florida and Texas. Every other state
Has the same issue.
is, and they vary by degrees, and I would say New York is one of the more severely. It's not just that it's not growing, it is significantly decreasing.
Right.
And so that is going to be a pressure on, let's just say, many of the SUNY campuses, although it's not something we're particularly worried about.
Great. One other question, I'll hand it over to the other trustees. It was great to hear you say, the campus seems back to normal. The students are here. That it's sort of again back to normal. And I was at my son's parents' weekend at Fordham this weekend, and we were talking about how, and my son's going to be a senior. He is a senior. How they all got robbed, like from the last 2 years, and so I know at Fordham. They're trying to make even more extra events for the seniors, before they leave, because the last 2 years they really weren't able to have any types of events. And so I'm wondering if we are going to try to target maybe extra events, at least for the seniors who will be leaving us in May, who also got shortchanged from the last 2 years of COVID restrictions.
Yeah, so I'm going to turn it over to Rick Gatto, to our Vice President for Student Affairs, to talk a little bit about really the extraordinary amount of work his team is doing in support of student engagement on our campus.
Kevin, we're all about that. It's interesting. I haven't seen it as much with the seniors. It really was the group, I think, entering that didn't get the high school experience, and then their first year here
Got robbed totally.
was really robbed. It was interesting. For then, Roth Regatta is one example of one of our biggest events. So that came back this May in full force. And what's interesting, this is the first time since Roth Regatta started that the entering first years were the only ones that had seen it. No one else knew what it even was. So part of it was trying to, the tradition of, you tell the next class about it, got lost for 2 years because no one had those events. So I think that was an example of it coming back, certainly, and I just want to give a lot of credit to USG, our student government. They have been, the last 2 years have been a phenomenal leadership group. So things like Wolfie Land, massive event where 6,000 people came a few weeks ago. Obviously homecoming, these are all big events. I think partnering with Alumni Association, thinking about the transition will certainly work through, but I'm confident that the events that have come back in full force. So
Nice.
I would encourage you before homecoming, we have, Seawolf Showcase. These are just massive events. We're always looking to build more traditions as well, but everything we've done, I think, will help highlight, and certainly I think for seniors anyway, we want to give them a big send-off. So those are things that bring back to our team to continue to work on.
Great to hear, Rick. Oh, and I lied. I had 3 questions. And my other question was to maybe Larry. You mentioned Larry earlier. You see Suffolk County going through this ransomware and cybersecurity issue, and you see in today's Newsday that most of the municipalities, at least on the island, are just ill prepared for it. How prepared is Stony Brook to address, cybersecurity, ransomware threats?
Yeah, we're actually in a very good position. There was investments dating back several years, 3 or 4 years ago, where prior to that we didn't have an information security apparatus. We didn't have a chief information security officer. So that has been invested for actually 5 years now. And we just underwent about a year or so ago, engaging an outside consultant to do a full risk assessment from a cyber information security standpoint. So it's an area where I have full confidence in our teams to be able to detect and deter and to respond as needed. So we're in a very good place.
Good, great to hear, Larry. Thanks.
Do we tabletop?
We actually just completed one about 2.5 weeks ago with our outside partners. And
Okay, great.
Very good.
Can I just add
Yeah,
a
sure.
footnote to that, which is, as we think about the cost of American higher education and ours, which has remained largely flat now for a very, very long time, these are the kinds of hidden costs that many people do not understand really drive regular inflationary costs for American higher education. We have to be cyber secure. The amount of data that we control, whether it is patient data or student data or employee data, is enormously important. Our ability to conduct our business every day. And these costs are dramatic and significant, and they go up every single year. And so those costs go up. If your revenue doesn't go up, it means you're having to cut somewhere else.
Got it. Makes sense. Any other trustees have any questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask about foreign students, so thank you. You said the student population is just under 26,000. What was it the year before, or what kind of a drop did we have?
It was 26,608 last year.
Oh, okay, so it is
Pretty
very
close.
slight. Okay. The other thing is on the Governor's Island. Who are the other 3 finalists? Or 2 finalists? It's 3, you said.
So there were originally
4
4.
and then 3.
Right, so it's us, it's CUNY and the New School as a partnership. And we have a very large
Yeah,
consortium.
remind
for
them who
ours.
the partnership is.
I don't
Or-
think we're really supposed to be saying
Oh, we're
it.
not supposed to?
un-
Okay, so
yes,
don't
yes.
say it.
So we are under
Got it.
embargoed information.
It's pretty impressive, though.
National, international, we'll
Yeah,
go with that.
very good, very good.
CUNY and the New School
Sorry.
as a pair, Northeastern and MIT. And MIT ultimately did not submit.
Oh, okay. And then the last thing, last year there was an incident in the dorms with regard to an older student, and Kevin and I had discussed, I think, the age and people in dorms, and remember the...
Yep.
Yeah. I was wondering if anything transpired over the summer with regard to addressing that issue, or not, which is okay.
Which is, when you say that issue, which issue do you mean?
It was a question about the age appropriateness of the, who's in a dorm. You had 18-year-olds, and the particular issue
Was it
involved
dropped in?
somebody significantly older who could have been a parent. And so that was the question he raised.
Right.
But
I'll turn it
Yeah.
over to Rick Gatto to
Sure.
answer this
So
question.
I know this situation you're referring to. So I should just say, and the 2 extremes, one is certainly older students, but also students who are younger than 18. We do have processes in place and work with admissions, say for someone 16 or 17-year-old. For older students, the one thing we still have to work through is, again, students do have a right to live in the residence. The question is, where do they live? And so part of our discussion is then looking at where undergraduate and graduates are housed to see. In our current model this year, we don't have anybody over the age of, say, in early 20s in kind of undergraduate housing.
Right.
So that was an unusual circumstance. But again, the way our policy is set up, students do have a right to live in the residence halls. We just want to try to make the pairing, the appropriate pairing in terms of age group.
got it. Thanks, Rick. Chris, or Father Alex?
No.
No? All right. Okay. Well, Maury, thank you very much. Rachel, let the minutes reflect that we've been joined by Vice Chair Linda Arman. Good morning, Linda.
Good morning.
And one comment I didn't mention when I was giving my opening chairman's report that was important. So when the governor was out here last week, she talked about the whole concept of a research corridor from Brookhaven National Lab all the way to Feinstein, and she highlighted Stony Brook twice as being a key component of the research corridor. So that was pretty cool. Especially the location where she announced that. So I thought that was pretty funny. Okay, so our next item on the agenda, we're going to have a presentation on the Middle States Accreditation with Braden.
And before Braden starts, let me just say a few words, really about him, if I may. So Braden Hosh has been our Associate Vice President for Institutional Research Planning and Effectiveness for several years, and was recently asked to take on a new expanded role as Vice President for Educational and Institutional Effectiveness. So in this new role, he is reporting jointly to me and to the Provost. And the addition of the reporting line to the Provost further strengthens our ability to make data-driven decisions about our academic mission and formalizes Braden's already close partnership with academic affairs. And this will help us comprehensively evaluate and strengthen our position as a flagship institution, as a member of the AAU, the American Association of Universities, which, as I should remind you, is the leading 65 research universities in the U.S., and help continue to support our efforts to be a first-choice destination for students, faculty, and staff. Middle States accreditation is the process by which we remain accredited essentially for federal aid, right? So the federal government sort of, I guess, devolves the power of accreditation to a series of regional accrediting agencies. Ours is Middle States. And being fully accredited is so enormously important to an institution because without it, you cannot access any federal aid. That is grant money for your scientists and researchers. That is Pell Grants and other federal aids for your students. So it's a multi-$100 million problem for us, or not problem, but thing that we have to be really laser focused on, and Braden is leading our effort of reaccreditation. So Braden, over to you.
Thank you, President McGinnis, and thank you, Chairman Law. And thank you, too, for covering some of that, because I was going to cover some of that, too. Accrediting agencies are actually part of what's called the triad. So the federal government, states, and accrediting agencies are the three legs on the stool to maintain higher education quality. So it is a requirement. It is also one of those hidden costs of doing business. So really important for us to stay focused on this. As an accreditor, Middle States lays out sort of a roadmap for standards, and the standards have changed since the last time we did this. It had been on a 10-year cycle. We're now on an 8-year cycle, but we got grandfathered in for 10 years. And so they collapsed from 14 standards to 7, but I've sort of roughly mapped them out here. I'm not going to go through all the criteria. But on the left, it really kind of talks about the what, so that an accredited institution has an appropriate mission, it lives it with integrity, it delivers effective student learning, and then it supports that overall student experience. That's sort of like the meat and potatoes of higher education. And on the right side, it talks about how well you are a learning institution in terms of evaluating your own processes. So an accredited institution assesses its own educational effectiveness. It uses planning and resource allocation and management, and it's characterized by effective governance, leadership, and administration. This one does intersect this particular governing body, and Chairman Law is actually on our steering committee for this and met with the accrediting agency.
I think you're on my schedule tomorrow.
I believe so. So, but these things also all have little assessment loops inside of all of them. So how well is your mission serving you? How often do you evaluate it? Talking about ethics and integrity, not just demonstrate that you have processes for ethics and integrity and supporting inclusiveness. How do you know that they're working, and how are you using that information to improve? All of that has to get packaged together in a very expansive document for us to be able to demonstrate this. So We made this joke with the Senate. There's 5 boxes up here. Fall 2021, we had a self-study institute. Spring 2022, we had a self-study design document. That's 2 of the 5 boxes. We're 40% done. Not really. The self-study design document's kind of the plan for how you're going to conduct the study. That was kind of an involved process in and of itself, but we submitted that in the spring. We actually got feedback back from Middle States. They want to use that document as an example for other institutions, so they were pretty pleased. So yes, and credit really goes to the team involved because it was a fairly expansive team. And I'll talk about the team in a minute. This year we're doing preparation of the actual self-study, and you'll see the structure in a moment. But they're busy assembling evidence, pulling together then outlines for how they're going to respond to the standards, and then we'll write several drafts of this over the spring, unify it over the summer. There's going to be some comment periods next fall, and it will be delivered to Middle States at the end of the fall, followed by a site visit by usually 7 or 8 external evaluators. None of them can be from a SUNY campus. They are all supposed to be from sort of peer institutions, usually within the Middle States accrediting region, which is Delaware to New York. But sometimes they'll pull people from elsewhere. And they'll come on campus for 3 days and talk to a range of people. I can guarantee you there will be a meeting with this group. So that self-study design document is one of the items up on our current website for Middle States reaffirmation. So if you're interested in more detail, or if you're having problems sleeping at night, you can go onto this website and take a look at some of the other things that we're doing. I mean, there's a lot of information there. Here's the structure for what we have. There's a steering committee led by a leadership team. I'm on there. We have 2 co-chairs, a faculty co-chair, Laszlo Mihaly from the Department of Physics and Astronomy, and Dominic Fortuno from East Campus. He's the Director of Student Services and Assessment, I think. And then there's an Office of Educational Effectiveness that actually reports under me that provides sort of staffing and support. And then there's 7 those are the 7 standards: missions and goals, ethics and integrity. I won't read them all. But each of those has faculty co-chairs. And this is that group. So the leadership team up the top, the working group co-chairs are over there. The numbers kind of show you which standard each of those people are on. We spent a lot of time trying to balance this: East Campus, West Campus, the colleges, make sure that we have diversity and representation, faculty, staff, those kinds of things. And then there's some additional members as well to make sure that we have broad coverage. There's a couple students on there also. So for fall 22, actually just before that, we pre-populated the evidence inventory, which is a large electronic repository of all the documents that we are using to support our case, so that when we say things like we have a grievance process, we have to have that document back in the evidence inventory. And we say the grievance process works well, we have to have some assessment of that back in the evidence inventory. So for almost every claim you make, you've got to have some sort of documentary evidence back in an electronic repository. So we pre-populated that. The working groups have been reviewing that, adding things, asking questions, reaching out. That's an ongoing process. And at the end of this month, those working groups will be providing us with outlines for how they're planning to proceed and the major pieces of evidence that they're planning to use. And so just through these timelines, we're sort of on that second line right now for October 22. They provide those outlines at the end of the month. We're going to give them some feedback, and then they're going to keep working on the outlines, begin drafting, so that in January we're going to have first drafts back. And then it's really sort of an iterative drafting process, draft feedback throughout the spring, so that their final drafts will be due May 15th. What does all of this mean? First of all, this really, while there's about 100 or so people involved in this effort directly, it is a broad reach out to other members of the campus community in terms of both asking questions and getting information, as well as communication. So we've had presentations to the Senate, I think 2 so far. We're talking to this group. There's going to be a town hall, I think, in November. So we really are trying to make sure that people are aware of what we're doing. Where they have questions, we're trying to make sure that those are all answered and that they can participate in the process. The Stony Brook Council information is particularly of interest to you. Governance in SUNY is, like many things, SUNY, unique. So there's a board of trustees, and then there's also the Stony Brook Council. And so as we're writing this up in terms of governance, we have to make sure that we're adequately communicating to the reviewers what those two roles entail. Many of them are not familiar with that structure, and so it's important for us to make sure that they are fully clear about what's going on. One of the basic rules they teach you in Accreditation self-study preparation school is make sure that your self-study reviewers are always happy and never confused. So that's really important. And before they come to campus, we'll make sure we actually brief you a little bit so that you're, you understand what they'll be asking. And then there are some future public communication opportunities that I referenced. So with that, I welcome any questions you may have.
Braden has been doing a very thorough job. Participated in several meetings, and it seems very well run and organized, and full confidence that you're going to take us over the goal line in 2024. Any examples, to just show how real the process is? Any colleges or universities that did not do the thorough job that you're doing and were either put on probation or lost their accreditation?
Few actually lose their accreditation. Those tend to come in two flavors. The first is a financial issue, so you have to be financially stable. That's the one that tends to shut colleges down. The other that they tend to get warnings on tends to be in this realm of academic assessment, making sure that you can demonstrate that your students are learning what you say that they're learning, and that you're using that information to improve their learning. And it's that closing of the loop that often doesn't happen. There were some issues in some other SUNYs. I won't name names, but there have been a couple of others that have gotten warnings recently. Middle States does post that publicly. You also will see, like University of Florida right now has some issues with their accreditor because of the way governance is not meeting those standards. So they're supposed to be independent, and the question from their accreditor has been, are you really independent from the state? Right now there's a tussle going on between the state and the institution about where that line is. So there can be any number of issues like that. In general, we're in pretty solid shape. You know, we are a world-class leading research university. Really, it's going to be some issues with documentation, some processes that have kind of not been as robust as they should have been, and we're working with the Provost's office to stand a lot of those up, and I think that will be fine. But there are institutions that do tend to get dings, and the issue tends to be twofold then, that you have to direct resources to go deal with that issue rather than the priorities that you want to work on. And then second is that it can be a slight reputational ding as well.
No, it makes sense. To use a sort of an accounting type of analysis, by the time this process is over, we want a clean opinion without any management concerns.
Exactly.
Exactly. Excuse me if I missed this
Sure.
already. How often is this now?
It's now every 8 years. It used to be every 10. So last time we did this was, we had a site visit in 2014. They changed the standards in 2016, and they said, well, you can still count on that going through 2024.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Braden? All right, thank you, Braden.
Thank you, Braden.
Talk to you tomorrow. Okay, we now have a budget update from Jed Shivers, who
Yeah.
I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet. So, Jed, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us where you were before
Well,
here? Or-
maybe I'll do
Yeah,
that.
do that. Yeah, very
Yes,
good.
so that he doesn't have to sing his own praises. So Jed Shivers joined us in July as our Senior Vice President for Finance and Administration. So while he's going to talk to us about budget today, he has a much broader portfolio than that. He oversees everything related to budget and finance, HR, facilities, risk management. So really kind of the operational side of Stony Brook. We are really excited to have him as part of our leadership team. Most recently, he was in a similar position at the University of North Dakota, And prior to that, with us in the state of New York, he was with the Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx for 11 years. Prior to that, at the University of San Francisco School of Medicine and Medical Center, at Yale University School of Medicine, and University of Miami Health System. So he has an enormous amount of experience both on the medical side as well as the entire campus. So he was a great fit for us here, and he's going to talk to you a little bit today about our new budgeting process that we have put in place over the last couple of years, as well as some thoughts about state operating aid.
Great, thanks, Maury.
So Jed,
Jed?
take it away.
Pleasure. I'm going to go stand
Sure.
up if I may. And I'd also like to bring Heather Montag up, if you don't mind, Heather. So we're really going to do this in two parts. Our first part is going to be Heather with the overall of Stony Brook's budget planning process, what's happening this year, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of macro issues that face the university. So Heather, please, here's
Thank
your
you.
magical
Thank
slide
you, Jed.
changer.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Heather Montag, as I said earlier, the Senior Associate Vice President for Budget, Financial Planning, and Analysis. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about the budget planning process that the university has been putting in place over the last year to 2 years. In fact, in spring of 2021, the president charged the institution with moving towards an all-funds multi-year integrated budget planning process that was designed to be strategic, transparent, and build trust within the campus community around resource allocation. This was also meant to leverage the different sources of funding that the university has in a way that aligns with our priorities around research, teaching, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and student success. Last year was our pivot year. We spent a great deal of time getting the right support established for the president and her senior leadership team to stabilize the budget after the initial impact of COVID-19, fund the priorities identified through the Strategic Budget Initiative, and then develop consistent processes and policies with an eye towards building a stronger Stony Brook University with measurable outcomes. We developed an internal framework for policy development and implementation, as well as a process and comprehensive timeline for the prioritization of resource allocation. The structure here was meant to be inclusive, deliberate, and flexible. So you see we have several different committees that work on this. The Strategic Budget Executive Team, which is chaired by the president, has members of her senior leadership team, really is the committee responsible for reviewing and making decisions around the distribution of resources. There's a senior executive team in place that meets more regularly to review out-of-process requests so that we can be a bit more flexible in managing both challenges and opportunities. And then there's a budget planning committee that is a group of senior budget officers across the campus that drafts up policy and procedure recommendations for the senior leadership team. We also work pretty heavily with our colleagues in University Senate. There's a committee, the Committee on Academic Planning and Resource Allocation, to run our policies and things like that through them, building trust and collaboration across the institution. We developed and implemented an annual budget development timeline, identifying for our units the different phases of the process, and identifying for them when decisions would be made around resource allocation so that they could better manage their budgets. We also established strong expectations around budgets to actuals with all the vice presidential areas, implementing quarterly meetings with each of those areas. Developed and implemented an all-funds multi-year projection by division to better understand the impact of our hiring decisions and the impact that they have on the university's out-year financial plan. So you're making decisions today, how is that going to implement the university's financial plan in the future? And we also encouraged our units to spend current fund balances prior to requesting new additional resources. So this multi-year planning took a look at all of the different funding sources and really helped us understand what those balances were, what the commitments were against each of those, and what the out-year projections look like. So this year, thanks to the process and the increased allocation through the advocacy with the state and with SUNY, $12 million, as previously said, to fund faculty investments, the university was able to make some much needed investments for our faculty, our staff, and our students. Our planning process has established a method for measuring return on investments so that we can also build these into the assumptions of our financial plan. So this goes back to some of the revenue generation that the president was mentioning earlier. And then holding the units accountable, the divisions accountable for the things that they said they were going to do. We provided funds to open up more class sections to better meet our student demand, making investments in research to provide much needed support to our faculty and boost research productivity, obviously authorizing faculty and staff recruitment, and then enhancing some of our business systems in HR and finance to create efficiencies in operations and campus reporting. And that really leads us into what to expect moving forward in this process. So as we look towards the future, SBU, as I mentioned, will be making some significant investments in its business systems to help enhance financial reporting both to the senior leadership team and also out to the campus community, again, for that transparent communication. We'll also be layering on a more strategic approach to the enrollment planning. So the president alluded to this, the work that is being done in the provost's office and with the help of Judge Shivers. And we're going to continue to have regular updates with our vice presidential areas around budgets to actuals to make sure that folks are doing the things that they said they were going to do with their budgets. And so while we've made significant progress in a very short period of time, this process continues to highlight some of the financial challenges that Stony Brook continues to face. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Judd so he can talk to you more about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. And I think, assuming that I'll finish and then we can, open up for questions, or if you have questions on the fly, please don't hesitate. So I think that one aspect that I wanted to give you a sense of is that states, since the Great Recession, some universities have seen their state aid recover from that period of time. And I think that we could argue that on an inflation-adjusted basis, we've actually never seen that. And this really shows the dotted line versus the blue line, really shows the degree to which our state aid has actually never recovered during that period. And what's might seem like an astonishingly large number, but when you really look at that gap over the 09 through 22 period, you're talking about $1.5 billion for that period. So this is real money, it's a real issue. And of course, the way that we see inflation taking place, for example, are the ongoing contractual agreements that we have. They're critical for our faculty and staff, there's no question about that. But they're real expenses that grow without our ability to have increased state support, or as the president has alluded to, being able to utilize levers such as tuition. So this is a bind for the university, and I think really working on this is something that we really all must strive to do. One of the other aspects is, and I think this is something that I hope you'll find of interest, is the capital side of our house. So not only do we have to have adequate state support in order to operate, but we also really have to have a capital infrastructure that works. This is really what I have to say, I would argue, is an extraordinary graph. And what it shows is the actual dollars related to what our campus should have versus what the other campuses in the system have, right? And so what you're seeing is about $1.7 billion for the Stony Brook side of needed incremental capital support to make our buildings into an adequate facility condition index. And if you look, you can see how we unfortunately dwarf all of our other system entities. So this is really an exceptional slide from my perspective. and something that cries out for improvement. Now, we actually have
Hey,
started.
can you just
Go
go
ahead.
back to that one?
Sure.
So now I'm confused. I thought it was, this graph was showing, this is good news for Stony Brook because we're so much.
No, it's
No.
quite the opposite.
Yeah,
Quite the opposite.
so
Everything under the
clarify
blue bar
that
is
for
So
me.
bad.
everything. So this is what we need to do in
That's
on
what
the
we
way
need,
left
that's
side.
not what we got.
Correct.
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 I'm sorry.
So you know, again, this is a great campus, it's a great university, but our facilities are in poor shape, and they don't reflect what we ought to be, in my opinion, as a first-rate university.
So the blue line is what we have, or is it the second line? What is what we have? Because this is just a little hard to read from
This
here.
is, oh, I'm sorry, so this is our immediate need requirement, up around 1.7 billion.
Right, and what's the blue line going across?
The dark blue line is just the average across all of the
Okay.
campuses. Okay?
Thanks.
So we have started to make some progress in this, and that's thanks to Bill Herman, our Associate Vice President for Facilities. He's been advocating very powerfully. And this gives you an idea in conjunction with the campus. And this gives you an idea of where we were. So this is the amount of money we've been working with over the prior years. And we actually are starting to build up this dollar amount. But if we really wanted to get back and deal with this $1.8 billion problem, we would really need about $200 million a year to catch up. So you can see we have quite a ways to go. Go
Jim, why
ahead.
don't you go ahead and tell them, like, for example, this year we will get.
So, okay, so in the 23 year, we're looking at about 129 million plus $23 million in funding to support our campus facility needs.
Does that make sense? So to make progress, we need at least 200 million a year. This year will be the best year we've ever had at 120 million. So we're making a little bit of progress,
Still $80
but it's
million.
75 million a year just not to get further behind than where we currently are. And in the years before, look at that, we were getting 30, 35, 49, 23, like nowhere close to even just keeping up. And part of the reason why we have such a huge problem is because this campus was largely all built at the same moment, and it is now all failing at the same moment. And to date, SUNY's allocation does not recognize the outsized burden that this campus faces.
So it's almost impossible to catch up with.
It's almost
Well,
impossible.
It's possible if you get the funding.
Yeah.
And honestly, you know, we see it. So our folks do, you know, I'm going to say a valiant job, but we have generators that blow, we have pipes that fail. You know, this is the sort of issues that we're dealing with every month. These are the sorts of things
Right,
that
and to
happen.
students and prospective students that don't understand why this happens, you see the shiny new toys go up and then the decrepit existing, which we talk about every time we get a budget presentation. It's challenging, we have to.
Well, and where that also
Advocating.
is really relevant, if you think about some of the sciences, engineering, there's work that's being done that we run the risk of that research becoming invalid because, you know, if a deep freezer stops working and you lose genetic samples, that is a major NSF or NIH grant. You also think about in the arts or in some of the other performance areas, now we're looking at a safety hazard. So there are a wide range of impacts.
Tremendous risk.
So, now this is something that I hope you'll find interesting. And basically, what we're trying to illustrate here is if we had greater flexibility in the use of money, then we could actually do a more efficient job and get things accomplished here. So what do I mean by that? The column on the left is what it's going to cost us to renovate the chemistry building and build a building for swing space. So one of the problems here on our campus is if we get to the point where we're actually able to bring on new buildings or renovate buildings, we need a place to put people. We need a place to house programs. And we're actually fairly tight when it comes to that kind of space. So part of our plan, as it's been initially described, and I think it's a very valiant effort, is to say, in order to renovate the chemistry building, which I think is about 274,000 gross square feet, and build a swing space building, because of the staged aspect of renovating chemistry while it's a building that's still being occupied and used, it's going to cost us $551 million. Okay? On the other hand, if we take the chemistry building and say that are going to be our swing space building, we're going to spend the same amount of money on the swing space. That's really, the 82 million here is really just to bring this building up to good standards as far as the building infrastructure is concerned. It would probably need another between 10 and $30 million to complete that process, depending upon how it was going to be occupied. But then we could build a new chemistry building, and the total cost for doing the exact same thing is $380 million. And of course, the difference is this money is for critical, renovation. This money includes a new building construction, and we don't have the ability to utilize those funds for new buildings at this time. So one of the things that we're pushing on, and I think maybe starting to get a little traction on, we'll see, is the notion of saying, hey, let us repurpose these dollars and build our chemistry building anew. So that is a very significant aspect in terms of, I would argue, being good stewards of state money and also of really benefiting our campus. So a striking example of how, in the case of having greater flexibility, it really makes a substantial difference. This just basically says, hey, we have O&M expense that we have to deal with, and right now our O&M expense is insufficient, and we're going to start to see that. So for example, as part of the budget cutting efforts that we alluded to, we have to cut our contract a little bit in terms of grounds maintenance, and so we're going to start to see that manifest itself during this fiscal year. Any questions? Any further questions or comments? I hope you're taking away. I mean, part of this is actually looking for increased dollars, but the other part of it is just gaining flexibility that many places have in order to be able to use our money wisely. Sir?
When you discuss flexibility, this example of the chemistry building, what are you referring to? If it's such a great idea, why don't we do it? Is there something that prevents you from having that flexibility?
Well, according to the rules, as I understand them, at the moment, the only capital that we have access to here is for renovation. And so we're actually prevented from using those same dollars to build a building anew. And that's actually the conversations that we're having with, and actually have a meeting later this week with both the construction fund and the division of the budget. Try and talk about those very aspects. So this is really, truly, it's a fungibility question.
Right. Couldn't a good attorney figure out a way to use renovation dollars to do new construction? I mean, I know it's been done.
Let's ask our VP for government relations to talk a bit about this.
SUNY has, until quite recently, SUNY has only received money that says only renovation, period.
So the state allocates.
The state allocates
Right.
a big pot of funds to SUNY. Renovation, there's a couple of things, but nothing new. And we've, trust me, tried to think about all kinds of ways to fit new into renovation. We have tried. So there's that. And then to get a new building, this state, it's a different process than in many places, but you actually have to go fight it on your own, right? So the engineering building, we went on our own to try and get funding for it, and this state has not particularly liked to do new buildings. You have to really make a case that's well beyond just the need for the building. It's not the only way I can say it. And so what happened, and I think it's last session, or one session ago, the word new appears in some of the SUNY funding. And so what we're trying to say to SUNY is, use that pot of funding for this. The chemistry building needs, let's do a new chemistry building. Let's have this swing space. and you can use this pot of money that says new. It would be very difficult to impossible to just get funding outside the SUNY funding from the state for a new chemistry room. So this is really our only option.
That chart about the system, that was our system.
You're talking about?
Yes, that is the SUNY system.
That's the SUNY system.
Yeah.
So most of the campuses are below the blue line, which is
Yep,
good.
they're doing great.
And then there are some that are above it.
Yep.
I just feel like, I mean, maybe it's time to rethink SUNY in a lot of ways, because it's like, it's like there's so many campuses and so much
Well, here's,
waste.
it's not a bad point, Chris. Judy and Maury and I have spoken, and things go well in November. You know, we are hoping to meet with the governor's staff as they prepare the next budget and the next State of the State address. One, again, to give the university centers some flexibility that maybe all the SUNY colleges don't have. But since the governor has announced her intention, you know, her designation of Stony Brook as a flagship, we're going to argue that that should mean something, and not only in additional funds, but also some flexibility in the way we do things. So we're going to be working on that in the fall and try to get that type of flexibility.
Chairman Ron, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Do we, if we're gonna put less, resources into grounds maintenance in our contract, do we have any assessment of the impact that's gonna have on recruitment? I mean, the physical attractiveness of the Stony Brook campus is a great tool for recruitment. Parents and students notice it immediately. My daughter went to Lehigh University. It's a gorgeous campus, and it had an immediate impact on her.
Yeah, endowment 2 billion, I think, or something
Yeah.
like that. I think, I would say, you know, honestly, I think what you're gonna see, so give you a kind of a direct quote from our wonderful AVP for operations and maintenance. He basically said, you know, you'll see a greater mixture of weeds and grass, you know, on lawns. It won't be quite as spiffy looking. I think honestly it'll have a pretty marginal impact. The cognoscenti, you know, will know it. You know, we'll be able to see it. Whether or not the casual observer will really notice it, you know, we're going to do our best to make it look as good as we can. But these are the fiscal realities that we're really operating under.
Okay, thanks.
What percent of our buildings are 60 years old, or how old is campus? 60? 55?
Roughly.
50?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it like 80% of the buildings?
It's a great question. Off the top of my head, I don't know,
Got it.
but
it's
I would imagine
the majority.
a large number of them, if not the majority, because the place was basically built at the same time.
Right. Got it. All right. Well, we'll continue to be.
That
Matt,
exemplifies
Matt?
the problem.
Absolutely,
So,
absolutely. You know, it's sort of like
just looking at that is remarkable and really.
Yeah. Universities are never one and done. You know, you just can't sort of lay down an infrastructure and then that's it. They have to be refreshed like everything else.
Matt?
Judy, just the rules you're talking about, are they actually SUNY rules? Does SUNY have the authority to change its own rule? Or is that something that has to be done in the legislature?
The two pots that SUNY have the language comes from the legislature. So again, there is a pot that says no. SUNY would have to agree to this, and, you know, frankly, the DOB would also have to, which is why the DOB is coming here this week.
Are we looking at rules that are so old that, you know, the idea of maybe 50 years ago, renovating a building made more sense than building a new building, but now here we are, we haven't changed the rules in so many years, and building a new building is now much more cost effective than renovating an old building?
It's possible. Again, I think it's that there was this, there was something against the building of new. I really, I don't, you know, I've been in other cities, I don't quite get that. But there was something that was in the way capital was given out against the building of new, and we can't issue our own bonds as many public major research institutions can, so we can't say, oh my God, we need a new chemistry building, issue our own bonds and do it. So we are tied to this SUNY pot that has very specific language.
That's really astounding, because I'm the chairman of the North Hempstead Housing Authority. We have 800 units of housing, and we can issue our own bonds.
Right. It is highly unusual for public flagships not to be able to issue their own bonds. I will say there's another thing at play here, and that is, so the two biggest bars are the two flagships, right? So the next one next to it is this University of Buffalo. And we are fundamentally different kinds of campuses, meaning we have very heavy science research infrastructure, which is very expensive, and often you can't really renovate an old building for the way that modern science is done today. And that's really what we're facing with the chemistry building, right? Enormous, prohibitively expensive to renovate, combined with at the end, you still do not have an ideal building for modern science. Most of those other SUNY campuses are not science research heavy campuses, and you can renovate what is essentially a classroom building to still be a good classroom building. But it's really hard to take some of our old science infrastructure and ever get it where it should be for modern infrastructure. The chemistry building renovated to be offices and classroom space and swing space, perfectly adequate for that. But it's never going to be the ideal science building. So that's part of our challenge. And ever getting both decision makers in the SUNY construction fund to understand that, combined with helping legislators who are issuing the money in the first place to understand that distinction.
The dollars should speak for themselves.
You would think that the 170 million that we could save would
just
speak loud and
illogical.
clear.
It's just
So
illogical.
let me just add, I think that I've been speaking with those folks, and I think they have an understanding of it, but you have to build up sort of enough potential energy that translates into kinetic energy to make the thing go. And I think that's really what we're working on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd like to not have to fight this building by building.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and that means, eventually we'll have a comprehensive campus master plan. They'll know what we're doing. I think those are the sorts of things where you start to get that mutual understanding. We'll see.
We can chat more about it at the December meeting, but thanks, Jed, for
Thank you.
putting all of this on our radar screen. Any other questions for Jed?
Yeah, this was an eye-opener.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Is there any role the council can play at any point in this?
Well, we get to name the building when it's new. We'll get that far. Hopefully they'll figure it out, and in 5 years we'll get the name of the building.
Other than the flippant comment from Trustee Hahn, let me, Judy, and Maury do what we will try to do behind the scenes in the fall.
Good.
All right, last item on our agenda today, we have some naming resolutions.
There you go.
Chris was anxious to do.
Chris.
Who's going to walk us through that? Judy, who's walking us through that?
I believe
Maury.
I am.
Got it.
Okay.
Right. So our first naming for the Kehoe Family Scoreboard and the Kehoe Family Atrium is in response to a $3 million gift that we got from the Kehoe Family Foundation. The gift was focused on supporting comprehensive excellence within Stony Brook Department of Athletics. The foundation is comprised of principally Kevin Kehoe, who graduated here in 1977, a member of the first football team at Stony Brook. It also includes his wife Lorraine, his brothers Brian, Tim, and Michael, and his sister Deidre Chanis and daughter Julia. The $3 million donation will fund the replacement of both the north end zone video board, and if you've seen it fritzing out in recent games, you'll understand why we need to replace it. You can no longer get parts for it. And the south end zone scoreboard in the Kenneth P. Laval Stadium. It will launch an athletics facilities master planning project. It will support the renovation of the football locker room, and I went through there recently, and I will agree that is sorely needed, and provide operational support to athletics career development and leadership programming.
Great.
Christopher will make the motion.
Chris Hahn makes the motion, and Linda seconds it. Any comments or questions on the name?
We only did buildings.
Scoreboards.
Look at the whole thing.
Where's the atrium?
inside
In
the
the-
new athletic center.
Oh, I see, okay, thank you.
So, there's a motion, there's a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Maury?
All right, our second naming today is a little more complicated, so let me explain this. So anytime we name a campus space for an individual or for an organization, it's a very important decision, right? Because it is a decision by this community to place an honor, suggesting a connection between the namesake and Stony Brook University. It is, as you might know, sometimes with the passage of time, sometimes there are calls to remove naming honors that were previously bestowed. Aware of this as an issue, when I arrived as a president in the fall of 2020, I announced the formation of a new committee, and this was the committee to investigate how we would create policies and procedures. So we called it the Renaming Building Spaces and Structures Committee. It was comprised of faculty, students, and staff, and all we were asking them to do, we weren't asking them to rename anything, we were asking them to establish a process that would be well understood by the campus community should such a request arise. So, Judy Brown Clark chaired that committee. They developed a series of processes. And they looked at historical materials, they looked at SUNY policies, they looked at university practices, they were well informed about what was going on nationally, and they put forth in the spring of 2021 a set of recommendations, and we adopted those recommendations. Then last year, we received a request from the undergraduate student government to rename the Margaret Sanger Residence Hall, which is part of our Tabler student housing community. So in keeping with the new process, we convened a committee, asked its members to review the request and make a recommendation. That committee voted unanimously in the spring of 2022 to recommend that we move forward with the renaming of Sanger. I have accepted that recommendation, and I now present it to you as the first step on the established SUNY process to try to accomplish this, right? So you all play step one, and then there is step two, right? The new name was chosen as from a list of nominations sent in by faculty, staff, students over the past several months. We received many hundreds. I don't even know what the final count was. Our process asks that nominations be consistent with the university's goals and mission, and that the new naming be able to inspire current and future members of our university community. The one that we are putting forward comes from Antonio Ferrentino, who is director of AA/EEO. Affirmative Action, Equal
Employment Opportunities.
Thank you. Equal Employment Opportunities and ADA and Training. And he is also a Deputy Title IX Coordinator in our Office of Equity and Access. That name is Dr. May Edward Chen. Dr. Chen was an African American and Native American descendant. She was the first African American woman to graduate from NYU's Grossman School of Medicine in 1926, what was then known as Bellevue Hospital Medical College. She was the first African American woman to intern at Harlem Hospital. She dedicated her life to researching and developing techniques for the early detection of cancer and for treating underserved patients in Harlem. She was a trailblazer for clinicians of color in medicine and inspired countless others, many generations behind her, to persevere despite societal obstacles. She really is a New York success story who fought against the odds to contribute in significant ways to science, medicine, and to her community. And I strongly recommend your approval of this resolution.
Got it. Did Margaret Sanger, did she ever do anything bad, or was there anything associated with her, like I know Yale, they had to rename a building because the building was named after somebody who was found to be a slave owner and things like that. Any issues with the Margaret Sanger?
I will turn it over to Judy Blaun-Kark to sort of summarize some of the community's objections to Margaret Sanger as the naming.
This first started with Planned Parenthood. Their national building was named after Margaret Sanger, and it was her affiliation with eugenics, which was the point that that building was renamed. And there's some other affiliations, but that was really kind of the linchpin of what it meant for who had the ability to give birth and some other practices that were affiliated with eugenics. And so that was the core of what the pushback was with the undergrad senate.
Got it.
In their presentation.
And did the council back in the day, did they approve the naming of that building? So the council has to approve the renaming of the building.
Correct.
Right.
And essentially, you're just treating it as though it's a new naming.
Got it.
Right.
So sometimes we name buildings after people who give the university a lot of money.
Correct.
And other times we name buildings after somebody who's had some type of neat impact on either the campus or society in general, and we're trying to recognize that like we're doing here today.
Can I just add?
Sure.
It was very important that this was not just a knee-jerk reaction, that there was a lot of research that was done, and the community representatives that sat on that board talked to many, many people. So it wasn't just a presentation, vote up, vote down. We brought in as much history as possible, because it's very important not just to look at the sins of our fathers or our mothers and just stand on whether it's part of our core values. So there's a rubric as to how we looked at this. And so I want to be very, I want to make this very clear that this was not just something that didn't align with our core values. It was across a robust decision-making process.
Got it. And all the recommendations, do we now have a short list of other good ideas? And so if we have another naming opportunity in the future, you already have a head start on the process because you got some good suggestions for this building?
We had many good suggestions. Part of why this seemed appropriate for this naming is Margaret Sanger was chosen in many ways because of the way in which she represented issues around women and medicine and healthcare. At the time the naming was done, it was not broadly understood about her connection with eugenics and the eugenics movement. So at the time, they were trying to honor a woman who had really fought for women's health rights, right? And so sticking with an individual who also fought for women's health rights, right? But
got it.
Also has all these other, things
nice
she was
photo.
fighting for. It seemed an appropriate connection. And most of the recommendations we received were really trying to honor that original spirit.
That makes sense.
And so another renaming, we may be linked to a different original spirit, so we may end up with a different set of names. But yes, we do have a great pool of recommendations from our community.
All right,
Okay,
so
that was well explained.
Thank you.
very good. So the renaming of the Sanger Building to Dr. May Edward Chin Residence Hall, I will move it. Is there a second? Second, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries, and now this goes, our recommendation goes up to SUNY, who has to approve it. Got
Okay,
it.
go. Thank you.
Perfect timing.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Father, no, now we finally all seen Father Alex in person. We can congratulate him on his award. You didn't think you were escaping without that, did you? We're very proud.
Well,
So I'll say we knew you.
Thank
you, Father Alex. That was very cool. He was talking to me and Chris about it on the way up. It was very cool. So I told him I had to embarrass him one more time and recognize him. Is there any other business that any council member wants to raise? Maury, is there any other item that you want to mention? Our next meeting will be December 12th, 2022. will likely be here unless Rachel lets you know it'll be somewhere else. And so hope you enjoy the fall, and we'll see you in December. Meeting's adjourned. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry, Frank.
Rachel.